Trump continues to poll far ahead of Biden as the 2024 election nears. The former president is performing 9% better nationally this year than in 2020, and this same trend is reflected in statewide polling. But will it be enough for him to unseat the historically unpopular President Biden? In this video, we'll take a look at the latest polls from every single state and see how many electoral votes Trump wins according to the latest data. Let's head over to the map. We will begin by filling in most of the states on this map. These are going to be the solid states, states that are polling in favor of either candidate by margins of 12 percentage points or more. These states were easily won by either Biden or Trump in the 2020 election, and things will not change going into 2024. So Donald Trump is performing very, very well in the center of the country. Every single state he won by a solid margin by in either 2016 or 2020. He is very likely to win by a solid margin in 2024. We're not going to include North Carolina in that category, but we will include Alaska, a state where Democrats recently won the House seat. However, Donald Trump is polling very well in the last frontier state. As for Joe Biden, we have most of the West Coast, as well as Hawaii, Illinois, and the upper Northeast, all very traditionally Democratic areas. Biden is polling relatively well there, although compared to 2020, he is definitely performing worse than he was 4 years ago. Before we continue, only 15% of you guys are subscribed, so please take this time to consider subscribing so we can continue growing this channel before the election. And so with these solid states filled in for both candidates, we have 181 electoral votes to Joe Biden and 125 for Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is going to catch up significantly with his likely states. There are many more states for Republicans that are within that 5 to 12% range for the GOP. And the likely states are going to be won pretty easily by both candidates, but they're just not going to be as guaranteed as the solid states we've just gone over. So the first two likely states for Donald Trump are two states he's done very well in the last two elections, and these are going to be Iowa and Ohio. Iowa's 6 electoral votes went for Trump in the last two elections after voting for Obama in 2008 and 2012. And so currently Trump leads by 12% and 9% in the two latest polls out of Iowa, so it's going to be a pretty easy victory for the former president. Joe Biden did not perform any better in the state when compared to Clinton's 2016 margin, and in the state of Ohio, we have another very strong finish for Donald Trump. The two latest polls there show him up by 8% and 12%, and in both of these cases, the more recent poll has Trump up by 12, so Iowa and Ohio could be moving up into the solid Republican category very soon. In Texas, Trump is ahead by 8% and 6% according to the two latest head-to-head polls. And again, Biden is losing ground in nearly every state, as Trump's margin in the most recent poll is the Emerson College poll, where Trump is ahead by 8 points. And so this will be big for Donald Trump to win Texas. 40 electoral votes to state has not been trending well for Republicans in recent years, and Donald Trump hasn't exactly been the best candidate in Texas when compared to Republican nominees of the past. He has not won the state by a double-digit margin in his two elections, unlike Mitt Romney in 2012 or George W. Bush in the early 2000s. However, the state is nearly a lock for the former president, considering Joe Biden's widespread unpopularity, and so Texas will undoubtedly remain a Trump state. And another state that Trump will win for a third time in a row is Florida, although he is likely to win the state by a much larger margin than in both 2016 and 2020. In 2016, Trump very narrowly defeated Hillary Clinton and flipped the state from Obama's victory in 2012. 2020, Trump expands his victory by a marginal amount up to a 3-point margin, and in 2024, I expect Trump to win the state by at least 5 percentage points. He really is polling very, very well in the state. According to the most recent polling, Trump is ahead by 10 points and 11 points in the state. We also have another poll that shows Trump ahead by 5% in a head-to-head matchup against President Biden. So Florida is undoubtedly going to be a likely Republican state, and there really is no saving the Democratic Party of Florida as of this point in time. Typically, this is what we would expect to see from likely and solid states for the former president. However, he has been polling much better in recent weeks than he had throughout all of 2023 and even 2022. And so there will be a few extra states that we'll be including in the likely column just because of how well he's polling right now, both nationally and on the statewide level. We have 2 polls from Georgia in the last 2 months that showed Donald Trump ahead by 8% against Joe Biden in the state of Georgia. Georgia has 16 electoral votes. The state was flipped by Joe Biden in 2020. But all signs currently indicate that Trump is going to win it back by a larger margin than he won the state by in 2016. Trump carried Georgia by 5 points 8 years ago, and currently he is on track to win the state by an even larger margin. There was an earlier poll conducted by CNN where Trump was ahead by 5%. But basically, every single metric we have to measure how Georgia will vote in the next election shows Trump with an upper hand. Joe Biden is significantly unpopular in the state, and so this will facilitate a Trump comeback in the Peach State. As for its neighbor, North Carolina, we have another similar story. Trump won the state pretty easily in 2016. The election was closer in 2020, but Joe Biden this time did not actually win it in the previous election. And so the state is now seen generally as being slightly more conservative than Georgia. Georgia recently elected 2 Democratic senators. And so in the Tar Heel state, the most recent poll shows Trump ahead by 4%, although there is a poll from all the way back in November with Trump ahead by 9%. So North Carolina will also be a likely Republican state as Trump continues to surge in the Sun Belt. Trump is now already at 250 electoral votes, just 20 away from the presidency, but we do have a few states that will vote for President Biden by a likely margin. And the 4 states are going to be Virginia, New Hampshire, Colorado, and New Mexico. In Virginia, Biden barely leads in the latest polling, only ahead by 5% on average. This was a state that he carried by 10 points in the previous election, so a significant drop-off from 2020 as we're seeing in many other areas around the country. New Hampshire, though, Biden is doing surprisingly well. He's polling at around 7% ahead of former President Trump, very similar to a 7-point margin in the 2020 election. And out west in Colorado, we have Biden ahead in the latest polling, but not by too significant of a margin. The latest poll shows Biden ahead by 9. We have an Emerson poll with Biden ahead by 4. It's going to be a relatively competitive election, but we are pretty sure the outcome is going to be a Biden victory. South in New Mexico, this is the only state with a Hispanic majority, and as Hispanics are turning towards the right, we do see the election getting closer. Biden carried the state by a double-digit margin in 2020, but the most recent polling here shows Biden ahead by 8%, and so New Mexico will remain in the likely Democratic column, but it is going to be a little bit closer than it was in the previous election. This would also be a good time to go over the state of Maine, where the polling is showing some pretty surprising numbers for the next election. We have a recent poll from November of last year that shows Donald Trump ahead by 14 percentage points in the 2nd district. That would double his 2020 margin as well as his 2016 margin in that 2nd district. So for the first time, the 2nd district of Maine is going to be solid for former President Trump. Meanwhile, in the 1st district, Biden is ahead by 16 points, although that is a pretty weak margin when compared to a solid 20% margin from the previous election. And in terms of the at-large vote in the state of Maine, this would give either candidate 2 electoral votes. Joe Biden leads only by 1% in the most recent poll conducted. Now, there was an earlier Emerson College poll from back in September that has Biden up by 11, and so I am going to categorize the state of Maine as a lean Democratic state. I'm not going to go as far as to make it tilt, but it is definitely going to be a lot closer than it has been in the last few elections. Trump is also performing very well in Arizona. This is a critical state for both candidates. Joe Biden can win the election without Arizona. All he would need is the upper Rust Belt and most of the states that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. But Donald Trump being ahead by double digits in Arizona in the most recent poll spells a very bad sign for the Biden campaign. The most recent Redfield and Wilton poll from Arizona shows Trump up by 6%. Another poll from December has the former president ahead by 10. And some other polls from early in December showed Trump ahead by 5% against Biden in a head-to-head matchup. So Arizona is firmly in the likely Republican column. Honestly, quite surprising considering how close the state has been in recent years. And with Arizona and Georgia now having two Democratic senators, Kyrsten Sinema did become an independent in Arizona, but when she was elected, she was a Democrat. In the last 6 years, Arizona and Georgia have gone from having two Republican senators to having two Democratic ones each, and with Joe Biden carrying these two states in 2020, it looked inevitable that they would continue on their shift to the left, but it seems as of right now that Donald Trump has put a stop to that, and these two states are coming back into the Republican fold under Donald Trump. We now have all of the likely and solid states filled in. Trump is at 262, while Biden trails pretty far behind at just 215. The next state we're going to go over is Minnesota. This is a state that Joe Biden won by 7 points in 2020. This state has a very long history of voting for Democrats, but it's becoming an increasingly purple state, although in 2022, Tim Walz, the Democratic governor, did get reelected by a double-digit margin. So Democrats definitely still have the edge in Minnesota, but the most recent two polls conducted by Embold Research and Emerson College put Biden ahead by only 3% and 2% respectively, so that will make Minnesota a lean Democratic state. Margins of between 1 and 5% fall into the lean category, while anything less than 1 is going to be classified as a tilt state. Another lean state we have on this map is going to go to Donald Trump, and this time it will be the silver state of Nevada. Nevada was won by both Biden and Clinton in the last two elections, but nearly every single recent poll from the state shows Donald Trump ahead. The most recent Emerson College poll has Trump ahead by 2 points, while a poll from Change Research has the former president ahead by 4. So in nearly every single poll that you look at, and I'll put more up on the screen, Donald Trump is leading in Nevada, and by virtually every indicator, he is going to flip the state. Nevada, a state that Trump did not win in the last two elections. We're now left with just the 3 Rust Belt states. This should not be a new sight to anyone. In the last few elections, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have been all or nothing for the two parties. Republicans with Donald Trump won them in 2016, winning Trump the election. 2020, Biden won them back. But as we see in this 2024 map, Donald Trump is performing better than in 2020 in nearly every single state, especially the competitive ones. States like North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Arizona, Nevada aren't even very competitive if you look at the current polling. And with Trump ahead in all of them, there's pretty much no chance that he's going to lose all of them. Donald Trump is in a very good position right now for the 2024 election. That is simply a fact. Joe Biden is not perceived well nationally, and that's one of his biggest issues right now. I don't think that it's anything to do with his record. It's more of just his age and how it is perceived so poorly because of how he presents himself. So when we look at these 3 Rust Belt states, they should be winnable for Democrats. Democrats do very well here on the statewide level in terms of the Senate races, the gubernatorial elections, and before Trump won these 3 states in 2016, they had 3 decades of history voting for only the Democratic nominees in presidential elections, going all the way back to the Reagan era. So right now in Michigan, Donald Trump is slightly ahead. The most recent poll does show Biden ahead by 4, but the 3 previous polls all have Trump up. One of them has Trump leading by a margin of 8%. We also have him up by 3% and 2%. So Michigan is going to be a lean Republican state, just like Nevada, a state where Donald Trump truly does have the edge right now over Joe Biden. And Michigan is seen out of the 3 states as typically the most liberal one. So this really is a bad sign for the incumbent president. In Wisconsin, we have an even closer race. Real Clear Politics' polling average currently shows a tie between the 2 candidates, but the latest polling shows Trump ahead very, very slightly. We have some polls with Trump up, some polls with Biden up, and another poll that shows a tie. So Wisconsin is going to be a tilt state on this map, giving Trump an additional 10 electoral votes. And finally, in Pennsylvania, this is going to be another one of the most competitive elections this year. The most recent Quinnipiac poll has Biden ahead by 3, but there are previous polls that show Trump with a pretty strong advantage. Trump ahead by 1 according to The Telegraph. A Change Research poll, this is a Democratic internal, has Trump ahead by 6% in the state. So Pennsylvania is definitely going to be very, very close. And so I will categorize it as another tilt Republican state. It really could go both both ways, just like Wisconsin. But when looking at the rest of the map, we see a significant shift towards the right. And in terms of the 2nd district of Nebraska, that is likely to go to Biden by a tilt margin. We don't have any polling there, but it is going to be very close. This is a district that Biden won by 7 points in 2020. And so this is the 2024 election map based on the latest polling. Trump wins with 312 electoral votes to Joe Biden, who loses re-election with 226.